Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Tola's podcast. Get ready for quite an adventure today.
Oh, yeah. Sounds intriguing.
We're diving deep into the story of wind power, setting sail on the invisible currents that shaped how we use it.
Ah, okay. So not just the modern turbines we see everywhere.
No, exactly. We're going way back. Forget the dry stats for a moment. We're chasing the historical gusts, these surprising twists in the story.
Right, because harnessing wind, it's not a new idea, is it?
Mhm.
Humans have been doing this for, well, centuries.
Centuries. Okay, so paint that picture. What were the absolute beginnings like? I mean, sails on ships, obviously.
Sails are the classic example, definitely. Propelling ships across oceans. Huge. But even beyond that, think about windmills grinding grain, turning wind into food, basically.
Simple machines, but totally essential.
Absolutely. And wind pumps,
Mm,
drawing water, especially in drier areas. Lifelines, really. These were sophisticated bits of engineering for their time.
it's amazing ingenuity, harnessing something you can't even see.
Exactly. And we see these popping up quite early, particularly in the Middle East. Persia, Afghanistan, Pakistan,
Hmm.
as early as the 9th century.
9th century. Wow.
Yeah, and the key thing was wind wasn't like water power,
Mhm.
tied to a river. It was accessible almost anywhere.
Okay, so it democratized power in a way.
You could say that. Yeah, it wasn't just the Middle East either. Think about the Netherlands.
The windmills, of course, draining the polders.
Precisely. Those iconic windmills did the heavy lifting, pumping water, reclaiming land from the sea, generations of work. It literally changed their landscape.
Incredible. And did this spread further? Like, the American West? Seems like a windy place.
It absolutely did. The American Midwest, the Australian outback, wind pumps were vital there, providing water for livestock, for small settlements, even supporting steam engines sometimes. They were critical infrastructure.
So, for ages, wind was this mechanical force doing physical work.
Right. Grinding, pumping, moving things.
But then the late 19th century rolls around, everything's going electric. Did wind join the party?
It certainly did. That's when things get really revolutionary. People started thinking, can we make electricity with this?
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me about these first sparks. Who were the pioneers?
Well, the first documented case we know of is in Scotland, July 1887.
Scotland, okay.
Professor James Blythe. He built this wind turbine with cloth sails, not just a model, a working machine.
Cloth sails. Seriously?
Yep. And he used it to charge accumulators like early batteries and powered the lights in his holiday cottage.
No way. So his cottage was the first house in the world lit by wind power.
As far as we know, yes. A little beacon of the future.
That's amazing.
But here's the kicker, the really fun part of the story. Blythe was quite generous. He had surplus electricity, and he offered it to the local village, Marykirk, to light their main street for free.
Fantastic. What a guy. They must have jumped at it.
They
Decline?
would decline free streetlights.
Yep. Turned it down. Apparently, they thought electric power was, and I quote, the work of the devil. Your kid, oh, Mary Kirk. What a missed opportunity. That really shows how strange and maybe scary this new tech seemed.
It really does. A fascinating little anecdote. But while that was happening in Scotland,
Things were also moving across the Atlantic.
right, in Cleveland, Ohio, an inventor named Charles F. Brush, around the same time, 1887, 1888, he built a much, much larger machine, huge for its day.
Bigger than Blythe's.
Oh, yeah, a 17-meter rotor that's like, what, 56 feet across, on an 18-meter tower, a real behemoth.
Wow. And power output.
Rated at 12 kilowatts. Sounds tiny now, maybe, but it was a serious piece of engineering then. He used it to power lights and motors in his lab, showcasing the potential.
So these were the initial sort of proof of concept moments. How did we get from Blythe's cottage and Brush's lab to, fields full of turbines?
Well, the 20th century saw things develop on two tracks, really.
Okay.
On one hand, you had these smaller wind stations designed for individual farms, remote houses. Think Australia, the free light generator starting in the 1930s, bringing power to really isolated places.
Right, making a huge difference to daily life in those areas, I bet.
Absolutely transformative.
Right.
But the big push for utility-scale wind power, that really got a kickstart from a global event.
Well, let me guess. The oil crisis, 1970s.
Spot on. The 1973 oil crisis. Suddenly, everyone was scrambling for alternatives to fossil fuels.
Made people think differently about energy security.
Exactly. And that spurred serious government and research interests, especially in Denmark and the U.S., into building much larger turbines designed specifically to feed electricity into the grid.
And that leads us more or less to today, where wind turbines are just everywhere, a major part of the energy mix.
A really major part. I mean, today's turbines range from tiny battery chargers you might use camping up to these gigantic offshore wind farms generating gigawatts of power.
The scale is just incredible now.
It really is. Just look at the numbers. In 2023 alone, globally, we added about 116.6 gigawatts of new wind capacity.
116 gigawatts in 1 year.
Yeah, that was a 50% increase from the year before. It brought the total worldwide capacity to over 1,000 gigawatts, over 1 terawatt.
Wow, and how much electricity does that actually produce?
By 2024 estimates, wind power supplied something like 2,494 terawatt hours of electricity globally.
Okay, that's a huge number, but what does it mean in context?
It means wind power accounted for about 8.1% of all electricity generated worldwide. And you've got 30 countries now getting more than a tenth of their electricity purely from wind.
From cloth sales to 8% of global electricity, that's quite a journey.
It truly is. It shows what happens with sustained innovation and, increasing global focus on cleaner energy.
So these modern turbines we see, the big white ones with 3 blades, that's the standard design now.
Mostly, yes. That's the horizontal axis design, and it's the most common. They're often grouped into wind farms.
On land, obviously, but increasingly out at sea, too.
Increasingly offshore, yes. Offshore is still a smaller part of the new installations, maybe around 10%, but it's growing.
What are the advantages of going offshore? It seems like it would be way more complicated.
It is more complex and often more expensive up front, but the winds out at sea are typically stronger and much more consistent.
Ah, so they can generate power more reliably. Higher capacity factors, is that the term?
Exactly. Higher capacity factors. Plus, there's less visual impact on communities, which can be a big issue onshore. So it's a trade-off.
Makes sense. And these wind farms, onshore ones especially, they can cover huge areas, right?
Oh, absolutely. A large farm might have hundreds of turbines spread out. But what's interesting is that the land between the turbines can often still be used.
For farming, you mean?
Yeah, for agriculture or grazing. So you get this kind of dual land use, which is pretty efficient.
That's clever. And what about the cost? We hear a lot about renewables getting cheaper. Is wind power competitive now?
Very much so. In many places, building a new wind farm is now actually cheaper than building a new coal or natural gas power plant. It's become one of the lowest cost sources of new electricity generation.
That's a massive shift. What drives that cost reduction? Technology, scale.
Both, but also the fundamental physics are on your side. The power available in the wind is proportional to the cube of the wind speed.
The cube. Say that again?
Yeah, the cube. So if the wind speed doubles, the power you can potentially harness increases 8 times.
8 times. Wow. Okay, that explains why windy locations are so valuable.
Precisely. And that's why you see big potential in areas at higher latitudes, generally windier spots. And another interesting point is when the wind blows strongest.
When is that?
Often at night and often more in the winter months.
Which is kind of the opposite of solar power, right? Solar peaks during the day, usually more in summer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they complement each other really well in a renewable energy system. It helps balance out the supply.
That synergy is fascinating. It strengthens the whole case for renewables.
It certainly does. But, it's not all smooth sailing. Wind power has its challenges too.
Okay, let's talk about the hurdles. What are the main ones?
Well, the biggest one is probably variability. The wind doesn't blow steadily all the time.
Right, so you can't just rely on it 24/7 without something else.
Correct. You need ways to manage that variability. Energy storage batteries, pumped hydro, other methods is becoming crucial. Or you need other power sources like natural gas plants, hydro, or nuclear that can be turned on or up quickly when the wind drops. They call these dispatchable sources.
So grid management gets more complex.
Much more complex. And integrating all that wind power can require major grid upgrades, building new transmission lines, often over long distances from the windy remote areas to where people actually live.
That sounds expensive and potentially controversial.
It can be both.
Yeah.
And sometimes you even run into situations called curtailment.
Curtailment?
Yeah, where a wind farm is actually forced to reduce its electricity production because the grid literally can't handle that much power at that specific moment or in that specific location. There isn't enough transmission capacity.
So we're sometimes making clean energy we can't even use.
Unfortunately, yes, that does happen. It's a grid bottleneck issue we're working to solve.
Okay, what about environmental impacts, besides the visual aspect onshore?
There are concerns. Habitat disruption during construction, for sure. And bird and bat mortality is an issue that gets raised. Turbines can kill birds and bats that fly into them.
How significant is that compared to other things?
Well, it's something that needs careful site selection and mitigation strategies. But studies generally suggest that Fossil fuel power stations, especially when you factor in the whole life cycle and the huge impact of climate change itself on habitats and species, are responsible for far more bird deaths overall. It's important context.
Right, comparing the impacts across different energy sources.
Exactly. And then there's public perception.
Ah, yes, the not in my backyard phenomenon.
Sometimes, yeah. While general support for wind power is usually very high in polls, specific projects can face local opposition. Concerns about visual impact, noise, though modern turbines are much quieter, or potential effects on things like tourism.
How do developers deal with that?
Well, good community engagement is key. Explaining the benefits, listening to concerns, sometimes things like community ownership models, where local people have a stake in the project, or benefit-sharing agreements can really help build acceptance.
It seems like there's a lot more to rolling out wind power than just building the turbines. It's technical, economic, social.
It really is a complex puzzle.
Before we continue exploring this powerful force, I just want to quickly say, if you're enjoying these kinds of surprising stories and hidden histories, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on our future deep dives right here on Tell Me More.
Good point. Okay, so back to the puzzle. We've talked technology, environment, economics. What about the global picture? Geopolitics.
Right. Which countries are leading the charge now?
China is way out in front in terms of adding new capacity each year. The U.S. is also a major player. But really, it's a global phenomenon now, happening across Europe, Asia, the Americas.
And does relying more on wind change a country's energy security?
Absolutely. Wind is a domestic resource. Unlike imported fossil fuels, the supply can't be cut off by international disputes or volatile global markets. So it definitely enhances energy independence and security.
That's a big strategic advantage.
It is. Of course, government policy plays a huge role. Incentives for renewables, regulations for grid connection, planning rules for siting turbines.
But government policy can also work against it, right? Like fossil fuel subsidies.
That's a major factor, yes. Subsidies for fossil fuels effectively make them artificially cheaper, which can slow down the investment in and expansion of cleaner sources like wind and solar, even when the renewables are fundamentally lower cost. It tilts the playing field.
So it's this incredible mix of forces, nature, technology, economics, politics, all swirling around this ancient way of harnessing energy.
Perfectly put. From those first simple sails and windmills grinding grain, through Blythe's devilish lights and Brush's giant machine, to today's vast farms and complex grids, it's been an amazing evolution.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave with you, our listeners.
Okay.
Considering this incredibly long history, this constant innovation in turbines, storage, grid tech, what's next? What future breakthroughs could really unlock the full potential of wind? Could we genuinely see wind power becoming the dominant force in our global energy system, truly breaking free from fossil fuels?
That is the big question, isn't it? Something to really think about.
Definitely something to ponder.
And on that provocative note, I think that brings us to the end of our breezy exploration today.
It does indeed. Our deep dive into the world of wind power on Tell Me More Stories Told As podcast.
From ancient ingenuity to modern marvels, it's been quite the tale. We hope you found it illuminating, maybe even a bit surprising.
Thanks so much for joining us. Keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep telling yourself, tell me more.
Until our next adventure together, may the wind be ever in your favor.